cult classic, action movies, shows, and the artists who helped make them. This is Action Gems.
And welcome everyone to Action Gems, where we find them
and you watch them.
And I'm Matt Kohler.
And I'm Richie Watkins.
And yes, we are going to finish
each other's.
Anyway, so today's guest is, well, who is today's guest?
Today's guest is Wyatt Weed. Now.
Oh, we did it again.
Do we know each other?
No, it's scripted. Anyway, so Wyatt Weed, he was from the Midwest, then moved out to LA to work on several different projects in the 90s. He was one of the Predators in Predator 2, and then later on worked on several different other films in the prop department of Muppets in Space, as well as Mission Impossible 2. And today, we are going to talk to Wyatt Weed about his journey during that period.
And it's going to get into the nitty-gritty of just a lot of different technical aspects of filmmaking that you don't normally hear about.
Especially from the prop department. I mean, who likes these guys? Anyway, here's Wyatt.
Well, taking it back even farther, I'm a child of 70s movies. So, you know, I was seeing Jaws in the theater, I was seeing Star Wars in the theater, and those are the films that really got me thinking about movies. Jaws was just a great film, and I loved sharks, but then you're thinking about how did they make that movie? How did they do that? So that got my gears turning. And then, of course, in 77, you get Star Wars and Close Encounters within like 6 months of each other, which was just, that was it. I borrowed a Super 8mm film camera from a family friend, and I started shooting Super 8mm films in the garage, and I was hooked at that point. What I found in the Midwest at the time was, you know, I moved into the St. Louis area. I was born and raised over in Illinois, but eventually I wanted to move into a bigger city, so I moved into St. Louis, and I volunteered in cable television, and I got involved in any local film productions that I could. And I went to Webster University.
I did not realize you actually went to Webster University as well.
I didn't graduate from Webster, but I did go for about 2.5 years. My wife is actually a Webster alum. She did media. She got a media degree from Webster University. She did a lot of production. Her focus was sound. But what I found back then in the 80s was that because we didn't have the digital technology yet, of course, everything was sort of geared towards a corporate and a commercial mentality. So Webster University at the time was preparing you to do a good radio spot. They were showing you how to cut a commercial. You know, they were showing you how to shoot a really nice Schnucks commercial and cut together a really tight 30-second radio spot. So they were basically teaching you and grooming you how to enter the local industrial arena. And back then we had like Merritt's, which was the huge production company out in Fenton, and Merritt's was doing training films, and so it was a lot of corporate stuff. It was very fun, but they weren't showing you how to make narrative films.
Yeah.
So in 1988, I got the idea to move to Los Angeles, and I just was so frustrated with what was happening here and the lack of, you know, narrative production work. And I really wanted to go where the movies were being made. So I had like $500 saved, and I had this 1976 Grand Prix. And I just took off one December evening. I told everybody I was going, and I just left. One of the things I did, though, is I had been going to conventions, like science fiction conventions, all over the Midwest. And I've been meeting people. And, you know, people do the thing about, here's my card. If you're ever in Los Angeles, look me up, man. I kept all those cards. I wrote down all those notes, because people would see me at a science fiction convention with a prop that I built, or a costume that I made, or a short film that I'd entered in like the short film contest. And so various people from around the world, hey, if you're ever in Los Angeles, I could use prop makers. If you're ever in Los Angeles, I built sets and costumes for movies, stuff like that. So I went out to Los Angeles, and I crashed with a friend out there who was going to school, and I just started calling all these people, and everyone who ever said, give me a buzz, I called them, and about 8 days after I got to Los Angeles, I was working on this horrible, low-budget horror film, but I was working, and I never looked back. I started doing acting, I started doing special effects, models, costumes, art department. I always wanted to act, and I always wanted to direct, but I just was so happy to be doing anything, and I loved it all. If I made a mistake in my career, it's that I did too many things. If I had just focused on being a director, I probably could have gotten a lot farther with a directing career, but I wanted to do everything. Now, the trade-off now is that I have a background in most things. I'm fairly knowledgeable about the whole of the film industry. I just think I probably could have gotten much further and been much more successful. But then, you contrast that with some young people now who they don't care how these things are done. They don't care how this is all made. They don't care how the visual effects are put together. They want to be they want to be a director. They want to sit in their chair and they want to look at their monitor and they want to make their movies. And that's fine. I like knowing how the whole thing goes together. So I had a fair amount of success in Los Angeles. I got some decent acting parts. I worked on some big films. I learned a huge amount of stuff. I learned more in my first 6 months in Los Angeles probably than I did the entire time I was in film school. And that's no insult to film school. It's just being in the trenches and being on sets and seeing how stuff gets done.
Yeah,
is just amazing.
That was one of the biggest things that I noticed coming down here was like fight scenes are just so totally different than like what I was even trying to do in St. Louis, because you just get a bunch of people who are professionals. And it's like, oh, okay, that makes it so much easier than how I was doing it.
I learned the hard way. You're only as good as the other people in the fight scene. You can be the greatest martial artist on the planet. If you're working with bad people in a scene, you can only look so good when the other people are screwing.
Oh, so, yeah.
Yeah, you're only as good as the weakest link in the fight scene.
Yep.
Over time in Los Angeles, I was out in Los Angeles almost 20 years, and what I noticed over time was the digital revolution was good and bad. We started getting the digital cameras, the digital films, the digital effects, the CGI started taking over. And that's great for indie filmmakers, that's great for young filmmakers, that's great for the expense of making movies, because digital, at least on the filming end, is so much cheaper.
Mm-hmm.
But, the miniature work started getting more scarce, the set construction started getting more scarce.
Yeah.
And over time, Los Angeles was expensive when I got there. It was really expensive when I left. And I had a friend here in the Midwest decide to set up a production company. He wanted to start making films. And he was talking to people out in Los Angeles, and he asked me if I'd be interested in coming back to the Midwest and working with him here in the Midwest. And I was ready to leave. But he was going to offer me a chance to direct more projects. And I was hitting a point in Los Angeles where I wasn't making any ground. Like, I directed a pilot for television, the pilot never got picked up. I'd done second unit on a couple of features, but I'd never gotten to do a feature film. I got set up to do a feature film, and then the feature film got canceled. So now I'm getting to be early 40s, and I know that, the big studios don't hand first-time feature films over to older people. I mean, they like young, hungry, commercial talent. I mean, if you're Steven Spielberg, that's one thing. You're established. He's a 70-something-year-old director, but he's Steven freaking Spielberg. Me, though, I was nobody, so I'm this 40-something-year-old kid, and I'm going to try and convince you to let me do a feature film for the first time. It's like, what have you been doing with your life? What have you been doing all this time? Why do you want to direct a feature now? So I came back to the Midwest, and I've never been happier with that decision. I mean, I came back to the Midwest. It's easier to work here. It's cheaper to work here. The technology now is so good that you can make Hollywood-quality projects just about anywhere. My background was such that I knew how the big guys did it, so I knew kind of how to cheat and get it on the low end. And St. Louis has been great. It's been, they talk about a big fish in a little pond. It's like I made the strategic decision to make myself a big fish in a little pond. Out in Los Angeles, I was nobody.
Mm-hmm.
Of course.
Here in St. Louis, I was the guy who worked in Los Angeles. So So that's kind of the Reader's Digest condensed version of my career.
So in LA, I was just scrolling through IMDb because I just like to just.
Sure.
He likes to do his research so he doesn't look like an idiot.
You gotta cyberstalk people. Cyberstalking is fun, man. Cyberstalking is awesome.
I spent many hours on you, so now the secret's out. But I was looking up. You did art direction for. Yeah, it was art direction or miniature direction for Muppets in Space.
Yes. It was an awesome experience because the Muppets, of course, Jim Henson had passed away at that point, but his son, I want to say his son was Brian Henson, was kind of in charge and was working on the film. And it's nice to work with people who have, an established production company and they have a budget and they have an infrastructure and, they're not just a fly-by-night production company working out of a rental office somewhere. It's like...
Of course.
Henson Productions, they had a studio, they had New York offices, they had Hollywood offices, so they really knew what they were doing, and they were really stable, and they focused on and worked with the Muppets, like if you have a team of actors and a team of stunt people, and you guys all sit around and you work on scenes together, the performers and the Henson people, they sit around and work on those scenes with those Muppets, like a bunch of actors sit around the actors' workshop working.
Wow.
It's not like you just show up on day one and put the puppet on their hand and start shooting. No, they spend time working on those characters and working on the humor and developing gags and developing bits. Specifically in Muppets from Space, you find out that Gonzo, because what is Gonzo? He's this crazy purple guy with big long nose. What is Gonzo? You find out Gonzo is an alien, and he got left here on Earth a long time ago. And Gonzo's people eventually come back to get him. So there's a big end sequence where the Gonzo spaceship comes and lands, and all of Gonzo's people are on the spaceship, and they welcome him back. And so it was this crazy turtle-shaped spaceship with big maneuverable engines and a big turtle heat shield on it. And it lands, and the bottom opens up, and the top lifts off, and like this whole performance stage unfurls, and all the Gonzos are there on the performance stage, and they start doing this song and dance number, welcoming. I think it's like Celebrate.
Yep, it's Celebrate. That's like the only part of the movie I remember.
Like you're watching this big, huge, close encounter style spaceship detach and open up, and it opens up, and all of a sudden all these disco lights start flashing, and it's like da 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 da, woohoo! And the Gonzos start dancing because it's a Muppet movie. But that was a really fun experience. It was stressful because it was on me. I mean, obviously there were live action parts, and there were live action sets, and there were other things going on across the country, but it was the first time I think I've had that on my shoulders where it's like the design of the spaceship is on you, how it comes apart is on you, how that stage unfurls is on you, how, like, okay, it's got to land. What do the landing gear look like? How does the landing gear unfold? How does, and then you got to tell a crew of people. That was a good experience, though, with doing drawings and doing technical illustrations and doing blueprints and stuff and referencing, like, Apollo stuff and Apollo rockets and looking at big Saturn V engines and doing all this art department research and creating all this stuff.
Dang.
Looking at the aluminum plating on aircraft and replicating the rivets and the aluminum plating and all this stuff. And then the crew people sometimes occasionally just kind of taking your drawings and throwing them out the window and just starting to do stuff the way they want to. And it was my first experience with walking up and going, look, I drew you a nice drawing. Do it the way I drew it, It's like, I drew it this way for a reason. It doesn't matter if the audience knows it. Do it this way, because this way makes sense, even though it's a Gonzo spaceship. Really, really cool experience. It was really a lot of fun. And I remember, like, 6 months after the film was done, they sent the big spaceship model back to us, and we took it and pulled out all the electronics and welded stuff inside of it, and we put it on like a big stand and sent it back to New York. So theoretically, the Muppet spaceship is sitting on a display stand somewhere in the New York Henson offices. At least it was at one point. So I don't know if anyone out there can confirm that the Muppet spaceship is in the Henson production offices in New York. I don't know, but that's what we did with it. So
we actually, down in Atlanta, we have the Jim Henson Museum.
Maybe,
so
I've heard that. I've heard of that.
Maybe the spaceship's there.
we're going to have to go at some point and check that out.
That would be very cool. There was an interesting experience on. It wasn't on Muppets from Space, but the guy I worked directly for was a guy named David Sharp. And David Sharp had worked on several Henson films, and he worked on Henson Muppets Treasure Island. He worked on Muppets Treasure Island.
Dang.
And they had done this like really cool special effects gag, and I don't remember what it was, but it didn't have anything to do with the Muppets, but it was this cool special effect that they rigged up. It got cut. And he walked up to Brian Henson and he said, "Brian, that gag was so cool. Why'd you cut it?" And Brian goes, "Yeah, I know it was cool, but the film was running long." And he said, "Man, if I'm going to cut something, I'm not cutting Muppets." He goes, "It's a Muppet film. I'm not cutting Muppets, so I'll cut anything else, but I won't cut Muppets." So I was like, okay, lesson learned. So going into Muppets from Space, I was like, well, our stuff may be cool, but we're going to get cut before the Muppets do. So, yeah.
Fair enough.
So, yeah.
Gee.
So then the year after that, you did miniature work. You got to do miniature work on Mission Impossible 2.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. There's a scene in the beginning of the film where, and this was an early kind of an indicator of how scary digital technology was getting. There's a scene early in the film where you think it's Tom Cruise on the airplane and he's escorting the guy somewhere, and it turns out that it's the bad guy. He pulls the mask off. It's not Tom Cruise, it's the bad guy. And they set the plane to crash into a mountain. They knock out the passengers with gas. They set the altitude such that the plane is dropping and it's going to crash into a mountain. We built a 14-foot long 747 model with a 14-foot wingspan. So the entire opening of the film, you see this 747 racing through the mountains and diving towards the mountains, and that's our 14-foot long model. And it's a fictional airline. I don't even remember what we called the airline, but there's big, huge graphics on it and a big paint job on it. I don't remember what we called it. We made up an airline and put our own. So it's like I don't know. It's like, yeah, I can't even remember the name of the airline.
Mm-hmm.
Now here's the crazy part. We built this 747, and they were doing all the effects work over in England. So we built the 747 in Los Angeles, and we built a custom box. Building the custom box to put the 747 in pieces to ship it to England was almost as big a job as building the model itself. So we shipped the 747 to England, and months go by, and the film was released, I want to say, like May 25th.
Mm-hmm.
On like April 10th, we get a phone call from production saying, "We need to do some more work. We're going to ship the 747 back to you guys. We've got more stuff to do." And what was this? Later on in the film, Tom Cruise convinces this woman to help him because he shows her photographs of the crash site. He said, "Here's what your evil boyfriend did. He caused this plane to crash." So during production, they shot like on a mock-up set of like a crash site in the mountains with like rescue workers pulling bodies out of an airplane hull. It didn't sell. It didn't, like, you couldn't get the scope of what was going on. So that late in the production, they said, "We want to send you back the 747. You guys take your 747, build a miniature mountainside, crash the 747, make it look completely destroyed, and we will shoot new photos of the crashed 747. And because this is digital technology, we literally only shot 35 millimeter digital stills and then they comped them. Like Tom Cruise had like a handheld computer device, and they were going to comp the photos onto the face of. They were going to track them onto his computer device and replace what was already on there. But they're doing this, like I said, we got the assignment on like the 10th of April. We got the plane back. We destroyed the plane. We built a model of the mountain. We shot all this stuff. Now it's like the 20th or the 22nd, and we deliver photos, and the film is out like the 25th of May.
Holy.
So that was our first taste of, and the whole time we're talking to the effects supervisor, we're like, do you guys even have time to do this? And little did we know, they were doing all this stuff digitally. They were scanning out the digital to film, and then they were going to do like a digital film negative, and it was just crazy. So that was our first experience. So when we saw the film opening day, we didn't even believe our footage was even going to be in there. Like, there's no way. But yeah, so the turnaround time on this stuff was down to just weeks. So that was kind of our first taste of how late in the game this could get done. It was really crazy. A funny side story about that: the effects supervisor on that film was a guy named Richard Urasich, and Richard Urasich worked on 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Oh, jeez.
Dang.
So one time we're hanging around the studio late at night, and I'm telling war stories, and David Sharp is telling war stories. Everybody's telling war stories about all this stuff. And then Richard Urasich goes, yeah, this one time on 2001, Stanley Kubrick walked in and said, and we were all just like, okay, you win. You win. It's like any story that starts with, on 2001, Stanley Kubrick walked in and said. So, yeah.
And it could literally just been, he said, good morning, and then walked out.
Good morning. Yeah, it kind of shut us up for a while, because it was like, we forgot who we were talking to for a while.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
So
2001 was fun. Tom Cruise never tried to recruit us. He never tried to push Scientology on us. Tom Cruise was cool. We never met him, but the production was fine. No evil stuff that we could detect. So
no, I hear he's a pretty cool guy, and I mean, we really admire, especially what he was doing with the last Mission Impossible, with like that fight scene in the bathroom.
Is
crazy.
Excellent.
He's a hard-working guy, and he makes smart decisions. I don't know if he's got a team of people, but man, just talk about picking good projects and doing good work. And regardless what you think of him politically or personally, nobody can accuse him of not working hard. I mean, there's nobody who works harder than he does. So I think he's insane. I think he has things wrong in his head.
It's probably because all the ridiculous stunts he's doing, and he's not trained to do it, and it's just like, maybe you should, I don't know, not do this. Like, he's trying to do things that Jackie Chan does. It's like, Jackie Chan has been doing this for 30 years. You've just started.
I admire him. And like Jackie Chan, though, sooner or later he's going to have to slow down, because your body just can't keep doing that. You know?
Yeah.
He's going to be 60, 65 years old, and he's going to have to, like...
Well, he'll soon start incorporating the wheelchair I have to him into the fight scene, so... But, so did you ever meet the director at all of either of Mission Impossible 2 or Muppets in Space?
I did not get to meet John Woo, who did Mission Impossible 2. I believe Brian came into the shop one day and talked to us briefly. And Brian was always very friendly. But no, John Woo, we were so far removed from John Woo. I mean, we'd be lucky to get notes from John Woo passed on through three different sets of hands. So, no, unfortunately, we never got to meet John Woo. So that was sad.
I'm really curious at how much it costs to ship a 14-foot plane from, like, that seems just not practical.
Well, and you bring up a really good point, because, okay, so Mission Impossible 2, I want to say at the time it was like $135 million film, which at the time was insane. Like, oh my God, that's stupid money. Now we've got, Avengers Endgame cost $350 million, I think.
Yeah, it's like, I think both Avengers are like 500 or 700 million. It's stupid.
So at the time we were talking like 135 million. But what you start to become aware of, and it's very frustrating, but I get it, is whose time is the most valuable. Like, you've heard stories of like an actor wants to wear a wristwatch in a scene. Like, James Bond is going to wear a wristwatch in a scene. We need to look at wristwatches. So somebody spends like 2 days and like $10,000.
What?
Goes around the city and gets different watches and brings them in. And the director and James Bond spend like 20 minutes trying on watches. And, oh, the Omega, this is it. The Omega, let's do this. I'm just making that up.
Yeah.
But I know of certain examples like that. And you may think, God, that's really stupid. And it's horribly frustrating to be involved in something like that. But the actor and the director, their time is infinitely valuable.
Yeah.
So on a film like Mission Impossible 2, I can tell you this. The 747 model, and this sounds so cheap to me. By today's standards, this sounds so incredibly cheap. It cost us $50,000 to build the 747, which actually was kind of a bargain. Because I won't tell you what we spent on Mission Impossible 2, but it was hundreds of thousands of dollars on Mission Impossible 2. So 747 the Muppet ship on Muppets from Space was hundreds of thousands of dollars. But on Mission Impossible 2, we built that 747 pretty cheap and pretty fast. But then when you've got a whole special effects unit set up over in England, and they've got motion control systems and blue screens set up, and they've got the motion control tracks mounted to the floor and leveled, and they've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on computer equipment and all this other stuff, and those guys are already based over there, and the shooting's going on over there. I don't know how many thousands of dollars it costs to ship that thing over there and back. But as ridiculous as it sounds, it actually made sense. And like the special effects guy, Richard Urasich, he knew David Sharp. He knew David Sharp could do this. He knew he could do it in the amount of time needed. So you're weighing all those things and you're making all those decisions, and it seems so crazy. Now, obviously, we can do things, we can make decisions that are much more economical, we can take our time, we can shut the production down. On something like Mission Impossible 2, it is a gigantic snowball rolling downhill, it's picking up speed, it's picking up more and more snow, it's getting bigger and heavier, and it's moving faster, and it is moving towards a release date that is unmovable. Like, it's coming out on May 25th of 2000, or whenever it was, do or die, and it will roll over people. And so you either stay ahead of the snowball or you get run over by it. And that's where a lot of the expense comes from. I mean, when they have millions of dollars in advertising and millions of dollars in commitments and movie theaters, reserving movie theaters for them. You know, when they're set to open on 4,000 screens on a particular day, and they need film prints in each one of those theaters on that day, they will sacrifice people at the altar to make that release date. So yeah, the idea of spending thousands of dollars to air freight that model back to us in Los Angeles, it sounded insane, but we need that model destroyed, and we need...
Yeah, because thousands of dollars is a lot cheaper than millions of dollars.
Yeah.
You know, the back end. So, I know so you talked about you being an art director for Muppets in Space. So do you remember exactly what you were doing building the 747? Did you have like a specific role, or like just kind of walk through the normal day of working on Mission Impossible 2, going in? Because did you like clock in, you know?
Well, you always go through... You guys all know what I'm talking about. You always go through the mental process of, you hear the idea and you hear the offer, and it's so exciting and it's so crazy, and your mind runs crazy. So you get the phone call from the guy that says, hey, got a gig on Mission Impossible 2, are you available? And you're like, oh my God, Mission Impossible 2! This is so cool. And then you call them and you go, yeah, sure. You go in and you talk about it. And then the next step is, okay, what is it? Because your mind's racing. What are we doing?
Mm-hmm.
And there were other things we talked about on Mission Impossible 2. There were other miniature stunts that we talked about that ended up getting done full size. Because Mission Impossible 2 got shot in places that were, like nature preserves, some of it. There were motorcycle chases and vehicle chases through areas that were very well protected, and they didn't know if they'd be able to do certain things. So at one point they were talking to us about explosions and crashes and various things in miniature, but ultimately they figured out how to do them full size. So slowly bits of work got taken off of our schedule. But you go in and you have the first discussion, and the first discussion is like, okay, so they want to crash this 747. The bad guys are on the 747, and they rigged the 747, and they want to crash the 747. So you start breaking that down. Okay, well, what do we need then? We need a model 747. We need background plates of mountains. We're going to need motion control systems. We're going to need blue screens or green screens. And you start sort of breaking down the elements. And we were lucky enough to already have like storyboards and concepts of what they were looking for.
So that was already presented you prior to. Oh wow.
That's already Richard Urasich coming in, who's a visual effects guy, and saying. So he's already coming in and going, here's how I conceive this going. What do you guys think? And then he throws it at us and talk about it. So because of, budget and time constraint, because even on Mission Impossible 2, it's like, even with all the craziness, like shipping a model back and forth across the world twice, there's still budget concerns. They don't just start throwing the money at you right out the gate. They want a budget. They want to know what you can do it for.
Yeah.
So then the first thing you ask yourself is, okay, the scale he wants it a certain size. He wants it as big as possible within a certain time. So you start asking yourself, do we build it from scratch? Because building it from scratch is always more complicated. You get your more specific results, but building it from scratch is going to be more expensive and more time consuming. Or is there an option available? Is there another 747 out there? So what we found was we started calling around, and I think we talked to the Universal Prop Shop. And the Universal Prop Shop had the old 747 model from one of the airport films. And I want to say it was Airport 77. It was one of the big Airport 77 planes that crashed in the water. Like in Airport 77, I think the 747 crashes and then it sinks under the water. And so they've got to pull the plane up and rescue the people from the sunken plane. So we were able to find this 14-foot-long 747 that had already been built. But of course it had been built in 1977 for film work. So it was just basically a big chunk of fiberglass. So it's kind of a smooth, detailed, not very realistic-looking 747. But we were able to rent it, make new molds off the outside of it, and then do our own fiberglass version. And then on our new version, we were able to put new detail on. We were able to put panel detailing, new engines, and we were able to make it more realistic and more accurate. So we were able to shortcut and basically take an existing 747 and turn it into a new 747. And then you have to think about, while you're in the building process, you have to think about, okay, where does this have to go? Well, it has to go to England. So you can't ship something that's basically a 14-foot square X. So we reasoned that the wings needed to come off, and they needed to go side by side with the fuselage of the plane into a shipping crate that would make it on a plane to England. So we had one guy who, while we're building the plane, his whole job was to build this wooden crate that was all reinforced. And I want to say he even did a steel welded interior frame on it. But then he built, like you can imagine, like you had a really beautiful collectible rifle or shotgun that would go into a box that had the form shape for it. So imagine like slots with foam padding in the shape of the 747. And then foam notches for wings to drop into. So literally, we could pull the wings off the plane and drop them into the box, along with the fuselage, and then seal this whole thing up and bolt it tight. And then the cool thing was that we talked to a shipping company that just came to our stage, came in with a forklift, picked up the box, put it on the back of the truck, and so we didn't have to take it to the airport. And then, we rented, to destroy the 747 months later, we rented a production space. We rolled up the door, and one morning a truck backs up, a forklift comes over, and pulls a big box out of the back of the truck and drops it on the stage, and it takes off, and we open the box, and there's our 747. So, we cut out a lot of we didn't have to do a lot of the pain in the butt stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you have to think about things like, how do these parts slide together? And then this is going to be motion controlled, so it's going to be on a big mechanical stand, and it's going to have to move in front of a green screen. So it's got to be stable. So what do we do inside the fiberglass shell to keep it from warping and bouncing when it moves on the green screen? So we had to think about big pipes and supports that would go through it. We had to think about bulkheads with pipes coming out of the wings so that we could slide the wings into these slots that would hold the wings and keep the wings stable, because then you don't want the wings to skew and twist. You want those to be locked in tight enough. But then you're putting that all back together, and it's got to go together on seam lines.
Mm-hmm.
So you're trying to design the seams of the wings and make break points where you can, because you don't want it to look like a model kit that's been snapped together. You want it to go back together on stage so that it doesn't even look like anything has happened. But yeah, we spent a lot of time researching, looking through Boeing books on 747s and looking at blueprints that had the actual panel line detail.
Mm-hmm.
We were taking sheets of thin aluminum, and we would cut out the pieces of aluminum, and then we had these, I think they're called pounce wheels. You use them in sewing, and they're these little handles that have a round wheel with these little spikes on them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you use those to mark sewing lines onto the cloth.
Yep.
Well, you get a pounce wheel and roll it along the edge of a piece of soft, thin aluminum, you get rivet marks. So we would take these sheets of aluminum, figure out the panel lines on the plane, flip them over, pounce the edges of them, make a bunch of little tiny rivet marks, put spray cement on the backside, and then lay that on the plane and smooth it out. So when you walked up to the plane and looked at it, it had all the rivet lines and all the panel lines.
Wow.
Yeah, it was crazy.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So, and we had to do things like, on the original plane, the original hull, it was a solid hull with painted windows. We wanted actual windows so that they could put light and stuff inside of it. And in the movie, you actually see the sunlight shining through the plane.
Mm-hmm.
The plane flies by, and you can actually see interactive lighting going straight through the windows, which is pretty cool. But we had to figure out, there's 20 or 40 windows on either side of the hull. So we decided to make a punch. We sent the dimensions to a company that made a metal sharp-edged punch. Mm-hmm. So if you can imagine in a factory that's you're getting leather cutouts of something and there's a metal punch with a shape on it that punches out the shape. Well, if you can imagine, we had a little metal punch that was the shape of a scale aircraft window, mm-hmm. and we could take it up to the side of the airplane and hit it with a hammer, boom, and knock a window shape out of the side of the airplane. So rather than spend days with Dremels and little files and stuff, we spent one afternoon with this window punch going along the side of the plane and knocking the windows out of the side of the plane. It's the thing about miniature work and special effects work is it's half science, half art. Mm-hmm. It's half logical and half illogical. I mean, you come up with some of the craziest ideas and they work. And sometimes it's about practicality, and sometimes it's about logic and engineering. And then you have the different departments working together. When I was designing the Muppet ship, I was basing it off actual aircraft. The thing would never fly, but I was basing it off actual aircraft. So if I could say, all right, I want these airfoils to unfold and I want these engines to rotate on the ends, then I could say that to the engineer, who would then go, okay, I need a stepper motor here, and I need a shaft here, and I need a stepper motor here. So, and then he could come back to me and say, can you give me like 2 more inches here? Or I'm going to have a mechanism here. Can you build a tank or a detail that'll hide this?
Mm-hmm.
And so then all these departments just start, in the stuff that we did, you hear about union horror stories. I'm sure with some union people, with some union departments, it's like, this is your department, this is my department. In the stuff I always worked on, we all intermeshed. I mean,
that's good.
The electronics guys and the mechanics guys and the miniature guys and the art department guys, it was all of us standing around the same table, coming up with ideas and figuring out how to do things. And it was just like science and magic coming together, and all the guys were there doing it. So
it made movie making fun.
Yes, it did. Yeah, and if you just were open-minded, you could learn so much, because every single person knew something, and every single person had a different experience background. So there was just so much. If you were smart, you just shut up half the time and listened, and you just soaked up stuff like a sponge, and you learned things. You learned things you just never imagined even existed. So
I've always been fascinated with miniatures ever since I pretty much similar road as you. I was 5 years old. I watched Star Wars. I fell in love with it. I'm like, this is what I want to do. And then I watched Jackie Chan movies. I'm like, okay, if I can combine this, I'm in heaven.
Sure.
But like, I've never had that mindset of how to build them. And I've always been fascinated, like, how to build miniatures. I've always been fascinated, like, seeing the picture of the Batman stun gun or the photon gun.
Right.
I was just like, how do you even do? Like, that's just like not how my brain works. And so like,
it's weird. I've got there was this great thing that happened. There were 2 different Teds that I worked with. There was Ted Van Doren and Ted Smith. They were both special effects guys. I'm friends with both of them. And we're all about the same age, and we all had the same influences. And we all were sitting around talking one day, and something, I think like the space shuttle was being launched or something, and we were talking about the space program and how cool it was when we were kids, and man landing on the moon and all this stuff. And we got on Skylab.
mm-hmm.
We all started talking about how cool Skylab was, the first space station, the first United States space station. And I said, I built a miniature Skylab. And Ted goes, I built a miniature Skylab too. And then the other Ted goes, oh my God, I built a miniature Skylab. And then we started comparing notes. I was a balsa wood kid. Like, I had balsa wood around the house. Dad did stuff that involved balsa wood. I don't know, like a box of balsa wood ended up in the house at one point in time. So for me, everything was take a chunk of balsa wood and start carving away with a knife and shape it into what you want, and then sand it and paint it. Ted Smith, like, he had access to poster board.
Mm-hmm.
And as crazy as that sounds, Ted could build anything out of poster board. He'd cut poster board, and he'd angle it, and he'd glue it, and he'd hold it, and he'd crimp it. Ted Smith built Skylab out of poster board. Ted Van Doren, who grew up in Los Angeles and was closer to the film industry, he built his out of like sheets of plastic from the hobby store. So he was like cutting with an X-Acto blade. And so it was interesting to compare the same thing with 3 different techniques. We all came to it from a totally different technique. I was lucky enough, though, that I got started in the effects stuff because, especially in the 60s and 70s, models was a huge thing. I think it was a huge hobby thing, but also, like, there were certain things that, like, if you wanted them, you had to go and pursue them and make them. Like, Star Trek was big when I was a kid. I wanted the USS Enterprise. How do I get the USS Enterprise? Well, you go build a model kit.
Mm-hmm.
And you can go buy a model kit for like $5 at Kmart, and you can build the USS Enterprise. So if you wanted something bad enough, it was like, get off your butt and go build it. The Universal Monsters, there was like Creature in the Black Lagoon and the Frankenstein model kits. Those were all really popular at the time. Mm-hmm. So I want the Creature from the Black Lagoon. Well, you go buy a model kit and you make it. I don't think there's as much of that anymore. I think really good teachers and really good education programs will give kids access to things. And now kids can think outside the box, and they can work with foam, or they can work with 3D printers, or they can work in 3D graphics. So, the arts is still really important for kids. But for me, I mean, models was the thing when I was a kid. It was like building model spaceships, building model cars. So then when Star Wars hit, the next logical step was, okay, so they basically built models. They just built them from scratch. So I started kind of going down that road. I went down the road of like buying a standard model and then tricking it out and adding stuff to it. Then I started building them from scratch, and then I combined that with my filmmaking and combined that with all these other things. And then, of course, you go to Los Angeles and you realize that everything you're doing is wrong and everything you're doing is horrible, and then you learn how to really do it. So, but yeah.
So how did you implement, I guess, the things that you learned from LA with your own stuff when you came back to St. Louis?
That's an excellent question. The thing about being in Los Angeles is you'd see, I don't want to say it was the right way to do things, but you'd see like the top of the line, state-of-the-art way to do things. Like, they want to come sweeping in from high, and they want to sweep down through the scene, and they want to move into a close-up. So they get a jib arm. Okay, so you see the jib arm in operation. You see how the jib arm is operating. And then you get back to the Midwest, and you go, well, I want a jib arm, but I can't rent one, and I can't buy one. But what I can do is get a couple of pieces of steel pipe, and I can do parallelogram joints, and I can build a jib arm. I can build a simplistic jib arm. Is it going to be as, razor sharp precision move as, Mission Impossible 2? No, but it's going to look good. So being in Los Angeles and seeing how the A-list did things the, quote-unquote right way sort of informed what I could do here. Or if, simple techniques like your sound recording, and you want your sound to be clean, but you're doing a close-up on your actor, and your actor is sitting in a big, bouncy, metal, shiny set, and the voice is echoing horribly. Well, you're on set in Los Angeles, and you see them do things like come up with C-stands on either side of the actor, just out of camera, and hang blankets. And then they put a blanket over the top of the actor, which muffles the sound, and all
Oh, wow.
It's better. So you see all these awesome tricks. You see all these great little ideas and techniques and stuff. You're always like, how do you get a camera right exactly precisely where you want it? Like, how do you get a camera into a corner? Or how do you get a camera into a position that, my God, how do you get the camera up in a corner like that? And then in Los Angeles, you see them do things like stack apple boxes, or they put two extenders on a jib arm, or they put two extenders on a dolly, and then they crank the dolly arm all the way up with these two extenders on top of it. Or they, like, somebody takes a C-stand arm and puts a mirror on the end of the C-stand arm and puts the mirror up in the corner, and then they shoot into the mirror in the corner, and then they flip the image. And so you start seeing all these little tricks and things. In the Midwest, I don't have access to the kind of like dolly equipment, but I remember seeing steady dolly moves done in Los Angeles because they would put extra weight on the dolly, so the dolly wouldn't be unstable and jiggle around. So even when I've got my little skateboard dolly out on a tabletop, I take a sandbag and I put the sandbag on top the little tabletop dolly to stabilize the dolly and keep it from wobbling. Highlights. You see things like, actors come to life in a scene when they have a little glint in their eye. Or like, you can have beautiful lighting, but if your actor has nothing in his eyes, sometimes the shot can go kind of dead. Sometimes it's as simple as somebody is sitting by the camera with a mag light, with a little working light, and they're just shining the light at the actor to get a little glint in their eye. Car rigs. Out in Los Angeles, these guys had these incredibly complicated briefcases full of all these different lights that would plug into the power system of the car. Well, knowing how they were doing that, we started getting battery-powered magnetic lights from a hardware store that, rather than rigging up the car, we'd get these little battery-powered LED lights that we could just sit down in the car and snap these little LED. You see how the professionals do it, you see the technique, and then you dial it back to, okay, well, what can I afford? I know how it's supposed to be done, but how can I do it here? And does it have to be a 12 by 12 silk, or can I get 2 2x4s and a white sheet? Does it have to be, chrome steel dolly track, or can I get a couple of iron rails from Home Depot? Does it have to be this? Does it have to be that? So it helps to see how it gets done so that you can adapt it. And that's really what it's about. It's about adaptation. It's about adapting the high-end techniques in a low-end way.
So it's kind of like what we talked about before we start recording, where a lot of people nowadays, they want to buy the equipment. They don't know how to simplify it to where it's like, I don't have the money, but I need this type of thing in order to make my project a reality. Where that's what you did. You saw how it was really done, and then you went back and you're like, okay, here are the tools. I have the knowledge. Now I need to find a way to, make it my own.
Exactly. Yes. I all the tools in the world don't matter if you don't know how to use them. I mean, if you can afford all the toys and you can afford all the people and all the budget to do it the best way possible, fantastic, good for you. But you don't necessarily. The saddest thing to me in the world is a filmmaker, a wannabe filmmaker, doesn't make films because they're intimidated by what they don't know or what they don't have. I think that's just horribly sad. I think if you've got something that can make an image and you've got an idea, go and do it. And the worst thing that'll happen is you'll learn. I don't want to make a bad film. I don't want to fail. There's no such thing. My first films were horrible. I started off making films that were recreations of scenes from Star Wars. They're laughably bad. But watch them. There's stuff in them where you're like, oh my god, that was cool. Like I was building little tiny X-Wing fighters and animating them on plates of glass so that we could roll over and peel off in sequence. And then I had stars behind them, so I could move the stars a frame at a time, and then I could move the little X-Wings on different pieces of glass at frames at a time. It looks like what it is. Like, it looks like little hand-carved balsa X-Wings and hand-painted dots on the background, but you look at it and go, oh my god, how did you get them to be multi-layered, and how are they... So you see the beginnings of these techniques that the first time I flew an X-Wing by camera on a wire and I tried to blow it up, it looked horrible, but I didn't give up. I sat there and looked at it and went, okay, why does this not work? Why does this not look like it did in the movie? And then you learn about things like high-speed photography and depth of field, and you learn all these neat things, and tripwires and professional pyrotechnicians, and you learn all these things. But yeah, the saddest thing in the world is somebody who's intimidated from doing it and doesn't end up doing it because I don't have a good camera. I don't have expensive toys.
Yep.
You don't need expensive toys. You can use a pad of paper and a pencil and make flip books. Go back to like animation 101. Draw pictures on a flip book and do animation. I like to think of it like, oh, I can't be a writer. I don't have a computer. If you have a piece of chalk and a blank wall, you can be a writer. I I can't be a film editor, I don't have this. I can't be a filmmaker, I don't have that. Yes, you can. You can do anything. The saddest thing in the world is people not doing creative things because they've been intimidated by all the technology.
Yep.
The technology is that's just one of the tools. So you can either be scared by it or embrace it. Or hire somebody else to do it.
And we are back. It was so cool to see Wyatt Weed, just to hear some of his stories about LA, because I have not heard any of those before. I knew he was in Predator 2, but I did not know anything about Muppets in Space, and definitely about Mission Impossible.
It was good to be able to finally sit down and talk with him for a good straight couple of hours, because usually when, over the many years that I would run into Wyatt Weed, it would just be very brief, hey, how you doing? What's the next thing you got coming out?
And I think this is a great podcast for anyone who wants to be an independent filmmaker, because that's what he's doing. His full-time job is an independent filmmaker. And next week, you'll get to hear Wyatt Weed talk about the challenges young filmmakers have and how to overcome those. Until then, see ya.